Is it possible for something that's incredibly beautiful to evoke a religious or mystical experience, or something kind of in the same ballpark?
I think that's what they're for, in some sense. You know, I mean, if you look at the structure of like a Renaissance cathedral, you know,
that's
just
literally what I was just gonna.
Right.
That was my tag on. I apologize, I didn't mean to interrupt. My tag on to that question. The next part was. Is that why we have cathedrals built like as spectacular buildings as opposed to a box or something?
Right. Well, it's if you're going to house the ultimate ideal, you build something beautiful, right? To represent its dwelling place, and it should be beautiful. And this is something that people do not take seriously. This is especially something we don't take seriously in Canada. I mean, you think about all the hundreds of millions of dollars that were invested into beauty in Europe. I mean, spectacular, excessive investment in beauty that's paid back. God only knows how many multiples of times. People make pilgrimages to Europe constantly because it's so beautiful that it staggers you. Beauty is so valuable, and we're so afraid of it. And I think we're afraid of it because it's a pathway. It's not the only pathway to the divine. I mean, there's pathways to the divine. Love is one of them, I suppose. But beauty, especially for people who have an affinity for beauty, it's like music. It's one of those things that you can't argue against, right? You can't even understand. It just hits you. And it shows you the ideal. That's one way of thinking about it. But it also shows you, I think, it's like a vision of the potential future. It's something like that as well, that if we just got our act together and beautified things, that's the place that we can inhabit, and that would ennoble us. And that's why this Jerusalem, the heavenly city, is paved with gemstones. You know, they're crystalline, they emit light. And yeah, it's the proper dwelling place for an enlightened consciousness. Beauty is the proper dwelling place for an enlightened consciousness. And we ignore it at our spiritual and economic peril. It's obvious that beauty, there's almost nothing more valuable than beauty. Economically, practically, right? So, yeah. Why that is, I mean, I don't, it's very, who knows? You know, I mean, why we experience gemstones, for example, is beautiful. It's very mysterious, but there are deep reasons for it. So, yeah. We need in our culture to justify the arts. And I don't want to do that by talking about high culture, talking about something abstract and evanescent. That's the wrong way to go about it. This is vital. You know, like one of the things that's really interesting about the University of Toronto is that the one side of the campus where we are is beautiful, medieval cathedral. Another side is god-awful factory. And you know, and the thing is, the attitude towards knowledge has paralleled that architectural transformation. You know, at one point, the humanities, let's say, were a sacred endeavor, and so was the art of being educated in the university, and that's turned into like mass factory, and that's reflected in the architecture. This isn't accidental. None of this happens by random chance, you know. It's not like there's a conspiracy or anything, because there isn't, but that doesn't mean that these things aren't tangled together. And the loss of beauty in the universities is a catastrophe, because without that beauty, there's no call to higher being. You know, this is also why, you know, I've mentioned to people that they should clean up their rooms. That's become quite the internet meme. But I'm really serious about it, because it's really hard to do that. And I've been cleaning up my room, by the way, for about 4 months now, because my life was thrown into such a catastrophe, and also we were renovating. And so, but it isn't just that you clean it up, you also make it beautiful. And it's really hard to make something beautiful. And it's really worthwhile. And what's really cool is if you learn to make something beautiful, even one thing, if you can just make one thing in your life beautiful, then you've established a relationship with beauty. And then you can start to expand that relationship with beauty out into the world, like into other elements of your life. And that is so worthwhile. It's just incredibly, crazily worthwhile. And that's an invitation to the divine. You know, you have to be daring to do that. And people are terrified of it. People are terrified of color. They paint their walls beige. They're terrified of art. They buy some mass-produced thing because they don't want anybody laughing at them for their lack of taste. And they would get laughed at because they have no taste. But you have to, well, it's right, because what do you know, right? You have to develop it, and so you're going to stumble along and make mistakes to begin with, and you're going to show yourself, because if you buy, oh, I think this is pretty, and you know, somebody comes over and goes, hey, what's up with you? It's kind of hard on your self-esteem, but it's you're stumbling towards the right, you're stumbling towards the kingdom of God. That's what you're stumbling towards when you try to make an aesthetic decision and to put something in your life that's beautiful, and it's unbelievably worthwhile to do that. And you have to steer clear of the frauds and the con artists and all of that, and art is full of that, of course, because it's difficult to distinguish between the real thing and the fraud, but it's unbelievably worthwhile. And so back to literature. I'm telling you this partly because I've been thinking a lot about the humanities and the arts. And practically speaking, because I know that artistic types are also entrepreneurial types, they're the same personality types, and so it's very much worthwhile to make an economic and practical case for this sort of thing. You study literature and the humanities so that you can familiarize yourself with the wisdom of our civilization. Man, you should do that, because people have been working on this thing for a long time, and it's rich beyond comparison, so why wouldn't you do that? And you teach yourself to read, and you teach yourself to speak, and you teach yourself to think, and you teach yourself to communicate. And I can tell you, if you can read and think and communicate, you are absolutely 100% unstoppable. And that's another thing that's so interesting about the humanities education that's at the core of the university. It's like there's nothing more economically valuable than teaching people how to articulate themselves and communicate, because they can identify problems, they can formulate solutions, they can negotiate to consensus, they can negotiate on their own behalf or on the behalf of others. It's like there's absolutely no downside to it, except that there's responsibility that goes along with it. But it doesn't matter, because there's no escape from responsibility. You can either take it voluntarily or you can take it involuntarily. Those are your options, but there aren't any other options. And so we need to understand the role of art and literature and stop thinking about it as an option. It's not an option. It's not an option. What is it said? Man does not live by bread alone. That's exactly right. We live by beauty. We live by literature. We live by art. And literally, not metaphorically. We cannot live without it, because life is too dismal and tragic in the absence of the sublime. So, and ourselves, we have to be sharp so that we can survive properly and orient the world properly and not destroy things, including ourselves. There's something about the establishing a relationship with eternity that's key to the construction of something that's beautiful, and then that in itself becomes a call to a relationship with eternity. So, and you need that, people hunger for it. I'm at the University of Toronto. There's the European cathedral side of the campus, the older part, and then there's the modern factory side of the campus, and it's soul deadening. My building is made out of cinder blocks, you know, and my brother-in-law, who's his own sort of genius, calls that hosable architecture. Anything could happen there and you could wash it away. It's like, and it's just, I have my students now and then sit in the classroom like that and look at it and tell me how it makes them feel. Random wires hanging from the ceiling, you know, nothing but cinder block, the cheapest form of construction, nothing that's beautiful, pure, boring, dull utilitarianism with these bare, shiny desks and terrible fluorescent lighting. It's like, it's ugly right to the core, and it's corrosive. It eats away at the heart of the university, which is about the beauty that's eternal. And that isn't optional. It's not impractical. It's the most practical. It's that upon which the idea of practicality itself is predicated. And that's the university. And people should be flocking to the universities, dying to be educated.